All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. My name is Peter Starzinski, and I'm the Director of Communications for the Oregon Nurses Association. I want to welcome everybody to this webinar about ICE and immigration. And I want to extend a huge thank you to the ACLU of Oregon for joining us here today. Before we get started, a few logistical items. The webinar is supposed to take about an hour. We are recording this and we'll be posting the video on the ONA website. So we can send that around once it's live and it will be accessible to you again or to any of the folks who couldn't make it tonight. We will have our presentation and then we'll have time for Q&A once the presentation is over. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen that you can add questions to at any point during the presentation as they come up. And once during the Q&A, I will read those and have our guests from the ACLU answer those. But before I introduce our panelists, the ACLU of Oregon, who I imagine is pretty busy these days, is doing this webinar for us on their own time and their own dime. So if folks want to make a donation to this awesome organization, you can go to www.aclu-or.org. And there is a donate button in the top right corner. Again, that's www.aclu-or.org and donate. And they do fantastic work. So with that said, I want to welcome Ethan Crow, the Associate Director of Policy Organizing for the ACLU of Oregon, to kick things off for us.
Thank you
So
so
Ethan,
much
take it
for
away.
having us. We tremendously appreciate it. My colleague Jessica Maravilla, just like your amazing O&A team in the state capitol, got pulled into some urgent matters in the legislative session, protecting some civil liberties for Oregonians. Actually, having a late night conversation with a legislator about a critical matter. So she's sorry she couldn't be here, but we'll be excited to go over some really critical information with you all. First off, thanks so much for the work that you all do. This is just another example of you all having to face society's problems in addition to the important work that you're doing. Luckily, you have a strong union that's advocating for you in the Capitol and on these critical matters. So I'm going to share my screen and go over a little bit of a presentation for you all. And then, as your folks mentioned, there'll be time to take questions. I do want to emphasize right at the beginning that this presentation is not legal advice and shouldn't be taken in the place of legal advice. If there is an ultra specific question to the point that it requires legal counsel, I'm not going to be able to provide that to you today. I have the privilege of being on our policy team. I'm not myself an attorney, but even if we had our legal director, folks from our legal team, they wouldn't be providing legal advice either. That you want to consult with the legal team at any of the facilities where you happen to work. And so much of how business, and in this case, I'll be thinking and talking about the facilities where you all work as businesses. The ways that they can prepare for these types of situations are by scenario planning together. So a great deal of this work, unfortunately, again, more things having to fall on your all shoulder, would be at a hospital by hospital, medical facility by medical facility level, consulting with the legal counsel for your employer, consulting as a facility about how you all want to tackle some of the permutations of how these things can play out. So we're talking about policy to action, protecting your workforce, you all, in uncertain times, and as well your patients. So as an overview, we're going to talk a little bit about the big picture. what's happening nationwide. We're going to talk about some of the critical rights that you all could know, that your patients could know, and how any business, and again, we'll be talking about your facilities as a business tonight, can prepare for the possibility of immigration enforcement activity. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Oregon for All Coalition, of which ONA, excuse me, ACLU is a partner. So first, the ACLU of Oregon. Who are we? Who am I that I'm talking to you? We're the Oregon affiliate of the American Civil Liberties Union. We're a membership organization with more than 46,000 members and supporters in Oregon. We're nonprofit and nonpartisan. We don't engage in any electoral campaign work. We're comprised of the ACLU of Oregon Foundation, a 501c3, and the ACLU of Oregon, a 501c4, so that we can engage in policy and legal research, lobbying, and ballot measure advocacy as needed. We're just one of affiliates in all 50 states and other territories, and more than 4 million members and supporters and activists nationwide. So, as a big picture, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges ahead. The president has said that he wants to deport 2 million or more immigrants. They've been very clear about their desire for mass deportations and threaten the use of large detention camps. In the president's first term, he deported more than 200,000 people, and now he's talked about deporting whole families, including some families that may be citizens or other documented family members. More than 26 million people in the United States live with a family member without a documented status. An important thing to understand is that DHS/ICE does not have the person power or resources to deport that many people. This includes money allocated from Congress. This includes the physical facilities with which to do this, and it includes person power. To accomplish the increases in deportation that they've threatened, they would need the cooperation of local police and sheriffs and potentially the military, such as a National Guard. That's not possible under Oregon law because of the sanctuary law that's been in place in Oregon for many decades, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about a little bit later. And the president is attacking more basic rights and more people. On his first day back in office, he signed an executive order to end fundamental current rights, such as birthright citizenship. And just last week, there was an executive order threatening sanctuary jurisdictions, which would include the state of Oregon and would include cities like Portland, where some of you all may practice. It's really important to contextualize a lot of this fear of what the president might do, to realize that we do not have a king. We still have a government with checks and balances. We still have 50 states with their own laws and regulations. We've had the privilege to recruit folks to testify at town halls that Attorney General Dan Rayfield has been holding across the state. And the Attorney General has emphasized that we have laws here in the United States. We have processes. And the Attorney General is involved in numerous lawsuits against the Trump administration for them violating the law and the processes of law in our country. And they've had a lot of success with those lawsuits. The ACLU, as a national organization, has been engaged in over 20 lawsuits against the Trump administration, where they've had some level of success in many of those lawsuits. We're going to hear more and more about executive orders in the coming months and years. These are opening salvos. The president does not have the ability to make law. That's still something Congress does. We do still have three branches of government. So it's critically important to ground ourselves in the facts and not let ourselves be controlled by their fear into doing what they want when they don't have the legal power to compel us to. They want to use fear as a tactic. So we're going to continue to ground ourselves in our laws and our civil liberties and the basic facts. How Trump weaponizes law. When I was doing some presentations after the election, but before the inauguration in the December, early January period, I would talk a little bit about the Insurrection Act and the Alien Enemies Act. And sometimes I had people roll their eyes at me when I gave some of those presentations. As you can imagine, people aren't rolling their eyes as much anymore. The Alien Enemies Act was first used for the heinous behavior of detention camps for Japanese Americans and other Americans during the Second World War, something that is a cause of great shame for our state and our country. Unfortunately, we have a president now who's once again invoking the Alien Enemies Act, trying to permit him to summarily detain and deport civilians merely based on their ancestry and their nationality. We've seen repeated legal setbacks for the president as he's attempted to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. We're also deeply concerned that the president may invoke the Insurrection Act, which gives the president the authority to deploy the military, including the National Guard. Um, and we're concerned that the president might use this for his immigration agenda. That the president did declare an emergency at the southern border shortly after inauguration and gave his team 90 days to issue him a report on whether or not he should issue the Insurrection Act. That report did come due on Easter, just several weeks back. And as of now, his team did recommend to him that he not invoke the Insurrection Act. But that's something that's still deeply worrying to the ACLU across the country. That's something that the president may seek to do. There have been, of course, so many harmful executive orders from the president, the declaration of the national emergency at the southern border, having the U.S. military draft a plan to send troops to that southern border, attempting to redefine birthright citizenship, which our Attorney General here in Oregon, Attorney General Dan Rayfield, essentially immediately joined a lawsuit against, ending the CPB One Act, one way for folks to move through the process of legal immigration, firing the acting director, chief immigration judge, general counsel, and head policy for immigration courts, and increasing domestic enforcement and withholding funds from non-cooperating local agencies. Again, these executive orders are opening salvos. We have three branches of government. Congress determines how federal money is spent, not these executive orders, and many of them are consistently being fought in court. So we'd like to have a little pause slide here because it can be really overwhelming to think about what the president's doing. On top of this, there is the environment of intimidation, threatening to pull funding, whether it's around things like DEI, whether it's numerous ways that the presidential administration is threatening to pull funding from numerous governments, states and municipalities, if they don't conform with the president's political agenda. We want to ground ourselves in facts. They do not have the legal authority to do a lot of the things they threatened. They do not have the money and they do not have the person power. We're going to ground ourselves in what we know and in preparation so that we're taking this seriously, but so that communities across our state are ready to protect ourselves and protect our rights. We also want to talk a little bit about this wonderful state that we live in and the fact that it reflects Oregon values, thanks in part to unions like yours investing in critical campaigns like the ones that are discussed here. So starting back in 1987, we became a sanctuary state. For that long, for that many decades, that has been the value that Oregonians have had, that we're a welcoming state to our friends and neighbors and family members who are immigrants. We've passed things like in-state tuition for Oregonians who are undocumented. We've passed things like Cover All Kids, making sure that all children here in Oregon have access to critical care, licenses for all. Just recently in 2018, our sanctuary state policies were challenged at the ballot and affirmed at the ballot. We know that this is the values of Oregonians because it's been protected at the ballot. In 2021, the Sanctuary Promise Act strengthened our sanctuary laws. So our sanctuary values have been affirmed in the legislature and at the ballot box. We know that these are the values of Oregonians, and it's been defended again and again. So we should take pride in our state and that our state leans towards fairness and that we're strong and resilient against this type of hateful anti-immigrant and anti-refugee rhetoric. First, I want to ground us in the constitutional rights for all residents. These are constitutional rights that each of you has, that each of your patients has, regardless of their immigration status. So based on Fifth Amendment rights, you do not need to speak to an agent, a law enforcement agent, answer questions, or sign any documents. Based on your Fourth Amendment rights, an agent cannot enter your home unless they have a warrant to enter signed by a judge or magistrate with your name on it that they slide under the door. We're going to talk a little bit later about judicial warrants and what that means. Um, Folks do not have to open the door if an immigration agent is knocking. They do not have to answer any questions from an immigration agent if they try to talk to them, that they have the right to remain silent. They do not have to sign anything without first speaking to a lawyer. They have the right to speak to a lawyer. And if they are outside their home, they can ask an immigration agent if they're free to leave. If they say yes, they should then leave calmly. In all the attempts to divide us and talk about what makes our immigrant and refugee friends and neighbors and family members different, we want to stay grounded in these constitutional rights for all residents. All residents, all of your patients, all of you, all of your friends and family members, all of your community members have these rights. The Immigration Legal Resource Center sends out, in many cases, free copies of their red cards that cover these rights. These are in a wide variety of languages. That they provide free copies to most nonprofits. Some of the facilities you all work at might be nonprofits. Some might be private businesses. But those are something that you can request from the Immigration Legal Resource Center, and something that you could have to distribute at your facilities. I'm going to be mentioning, oh, Peter, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to remind folks that there's a lot of information. If you have questions, put them in that Q&A function in the box, and we'll get all to that later. So I just wanted to interject one there real quick. Thanks.
I'll also be this evening sending along an email to your amazing team at ONA with links to the resources that we'll be mentioning so they can be sent along to you all. But we want to just ground us in the basic rights that everyone has before we move forward. We are a sanctuary state. So what does that mean for Oregon to be a sanctuary state? It does not mean that ICE cannot operate in the state of Oregon. What Oregon law prohibits is for state and local government, including the police, from helping to enforce federal immigration laws without an order signed by a judge. That government agencies cannot enforce federal immigration law. They cannot cooperate with ICE without an order signed by a judge. Oregon sanctuary laws do not stop deportations or federal prosecutions for immigration-related crimes in Oregon. ICE may seek to take actions in sensitive areas such as schools, house of worship, and hospitals. They are not specifically protected under Oregon law, even under our Sanctuary Promise Act. Oregon law allows any person to bring a civil action against an agency that violates these laws. The law allows a person to sue the violating agency, asking a judge to order them to stop violating sanctuary law. That I'll screen share a little later on in our presentation resources directly from the Attorney General's office. But there's even a hotline you can call if you believe your local police are enforcing federal immigration law in violation of Oregon state law. You can report that to the hotline, and the Attorney General can investigate, and a lawsuit can be brought to compel folks to follow our sanctuary laws here in Oregon. So again, some folks think we're a sanctuary state, and that means that ICE cannot operate in Oregon. That is not true. What Oregon law prohibits is state and local government from helping to enforce federal immigration laws unless there's an order signed by a judge. If there is an order signed by a judge, then yes, they must cooperate. So a legal framework, some essential legal frameworks from a key resource that I'll also show specifically for healthcare professionals such as yourself. So patient rights and protections. Let's ground ourselves in the fact that all patients in the United States have legal rights regardless of their immigration status. That includes the right to emergency care through the EMTALA, ensuring that everyone, regardless of immigration status or ability to pay, is entitled to receive emergency care. Patient information is protected under HIPAA. I won't lecture you all about HIPAA. You obviously know a whole lot about it. And everyone has a right to equal protection. The Constitution's equal protection provisions apply to all persons in the United States, regardless of immigration status. So as a healthcare worker, what can you do? What are specific things that healthcare workers can do? that your healthcare facility can proactively reassure patients. You can communicate to the communities and patients you serve that immigration status does not affect a patient's right to receive medical care. For example, a statement is simple: we provide care regardless of immigration status. Whenever possible, as a best practice, do not ask about immigration status unless required. If there's a situation where you absolutely must require about immigration status, collect such information for a patient, ensure that information is secure and separate from medical records, and monitor and address rumors in the community. If false reports of immigration enforcement presence spread, issue accurate information to patients and local networks in a timely manner to reduce cancellations and fear. We've seen situations, for example, where a rumor is that ICE is outside of a particular business that serves the immigrant activity. We have a statewide hotline, our coalition does rather, for folks to report immigration enforcement activity. We then have volunteer verifiers, which any of you can be in your free time, but you're obviously busy people, who then verify that ICE activity. Because if we can confirm that it wasn't ICE activity, that could prevent a business from losing days of customers coming in their door because of misinformation. We can hopefully prevent people from not accessing medical care that they urgently need because of a false rumor of immigration enforcement activity. Misinformation can cause just as, if not more, harm than actual immigration enforcement activity. So there's a lot of text on these slides. I'm going to move through it very slowly. But essentially, there's a wide variety of scenarios of what could happen if immigration comes into your workplace, comes to your hospital, comes into your facility where you all work. I'm going to talk through some of the best practices for what to do to prepare for those scenarios. But ultimately, what it is about is cooperation. You, your employer, the folks in charge of your facilities, your security team, talking together about what you might do if ICE does appear at your facility, looking for a given individual or engaging in a broader raid. As I said, this presentation is not legal advice, and ultimately you're going to have to work with the legal counsel at your hospital or your facility for the most detailed questions. But here are some of the key preparation steps that you can take. One, any workplace should be prepared for a potential I-9 audit. The Trump administration has shown an increased interest in these I-9 audits, and this is targeting people who work currently at your facility. You obviously want to work with your HR department and whomever your legal counsel is to prepare for that potential I-9 audit, but it's something that could occur. That folks should be encouraged to find a qualified immigration lawyer now before anything happens. Some of the resources we share will include things like the ECHO network, which we highly encourage folks to get in touch with now to begin the process of consulting with an immigration attorney before things happen. And the resources for how anyone can reach out to the ECHO network to pursue talking to an immigration lawyer will be in follow-up resources that we share. You want to make a written response plan. Who at any given time is in charge if immigration does come into your facility? What are the public areas of your facility and what are the private areas? Whom is delegated to speak to law enforcement, including ICE, should they come into your facility? These are questions that you're going to have to ask as a team and to consider together, but having a written plan and even doing that scenario planning and drills will help in the case of if ICE does come into your facility. Practice a plan with your workers, practice what to do and what to say. You can provide a Know Your Rights training for all of your staff. Us and many other organizations across the state are available to do Know Your Rights trainings for other folks in your facility who might be interested. You want to train your staff to not run away if ICE agents show up. Your patients should hopefully also follow that same guidance. Do not run away if ICE agents show up. Running away could give ICE a reason to arrest workers or to arrest patients. Do not give ICE agents permission to enter your workplace. Once you've proactively given them that permission, then that's very different than if they've come with a judicial warrant. and do not answer questions or give them any information. Decide whom is going to speak to ICE in case they should enter your facility. You and all the workers in your facility have the right to stay silent and to ask to talk to a lawyer, as do any of your patients. You can give your workers and distribute to patients a list of lawyers or organizations that can provide high quality, free, or low cost immigration legal services for them and their families. And you can connect with an immigration response network in your area. We recently, through the Oregon for All Coalition, just did brought on folks who are providing additional staff capacity to the Oregon for All Rapid Response Network, which I'll share some information about a little bit later on. Critically, if ICE comes into your facility, ICE, just like anyone else, can enter the public areas of your facility. If there's a place where any member of the public can walk in a door, sit in a waiting room, use the restroom, ICE can go in those areas. If ICE sees something in plain view, documents in plain view, information in plain view, they can see that and they can access that information if it's in plain view. If there are areas in your facility that are not available to the public, that are secure and private for you, all the people that work at that facility, make sure those areas are very clearly marked: private, not public, employees only, nurses only, doctors only, whatever your preferred nomenclature is. Again, you want to work with your facility. If there are areas that are marked private, that are not available to the public to enter, ICE cannot enter that unless they have a judicial warrant. And what's key is it must be a judicial warrant, not another form of warrant. So a judicial warrant is valid only if it includes the name of a court, a case number, the signature of a judge, the date and time issued, and the section that describes the specific areas to be searched. And you can see here an example. A judicial warrant is not an ICE warrant. An ICE warrant is issued by a federal agency and not a judge. It says warrant for the arrest of a quote unquote alien, and it's signed by an officer, not a judge. ICE can only go into the private areas of your facility with a judicial warrant, not with an ICE warrant. So in a little more detail, what to do if immigration comes into your workplace. If agents enter a public area of your business, you want to have one person who's delegated to say, I'm the employer. You cannot go to other areas of the workplace without my permission. If ICE agents try to enter a private area, say this is a private area, you cannot enter without a judicial warrant signed by a judge. Do you have a judicial warrant? Again, it must be a judicial warrant. If they're comfortable, you can encourage your staff to take video or photos during an immigration action. If the agents do have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, ask for a copy and read it. Make a copy if you can. You can still decline to give consent for the search. Watch the agents carefully, keep track of what they do, see if they're following what's written on the warrant. For example, the warrant may limit the areas the agents can search. If ICE agents try to question you or other workers, remind the workers they have a right to stay silent and ask for a lawyer. Again, that's a constitutional right for any of your patients, for anyone, to stay silent and ask for a lawyer. When the immigration agents leave, record or write down everything you saw. This will help you remember the details when you talk to a lawyer later. So again, these top points here: if an agent enters the public area of your business, say I'm the employer. You cannot go to other areas of the workplace without my permission. But there's a lot of steps that go into that. That goes into having a meeting with your coworkers, meeting with your employers and the people in charge of whatever facility you work in, consulting with your legal counsel and with your HR, and delegating who at any given time is the lead in your facility who will speak to ICE or law enforcement should they enter your facility. How are you going to alert that person? If you're in a large facility, if ICE enters one part of a large facility, how are you going to alert that person? And how are the other members of your team going to be trained to say, you need to speak to my employer. I've alerted them. So the employer can come say, I'm the employer. You cannot go into those private areas. This is something that you'll want to plan with your team so that any given employee knows to say, you need to speak to the manager, you need to speak to the employer. I'm getting them right now. this you cannot enter private areas without a judicial warrant. And whom is going to be that person who will then go speak to ICE should they come in? Does your legal counsel want to be present? That's ultimately up to them and something that they want to discuss. But it's going to be a lot of collaboration and cooperation amongst your teams before you get to that point. It can sound pretty simple, but it's a lot of opportunity for you to build worker solidarity, and then also engage with your employer to plan for these types of scenarios. The Oregon for All Coalition includes ACLU, Apano, folks like Innovation Law Lab, the Oregon Food Bank, and many, many others, including some wonderful labor partners. This coalition has come together in the face of the persecution that immigrants are facing here in Oregon. We're building out a rapid response network across Oregon, which includes a 24-hour call-in hotline where folks can report immigration enforcement activity, which I'll share in a follow-up email with your amazing team so it can go out to you all. That hotline, folks can then call. There are volunteer verifiers across the state, which will verify that rumor of ICE activity. Again, we want to make sure that we're preventing misinformation from growing because it can be just as damaging as actual immigration enforcement activity. Once there is verification, that information is sent to immigration attorneys and rapid response leaders across the state who can work to try to get resources from direct support to families after a family member has been caught up in immigration to in touch with immigration enforcement attorneys that can try to get support to someone in the case of that instance. Oregon for All also critically is working proactively to change the conversation about our immigrant and refugee friends and neighbors in Oregonian and friends and neighbors in Oregon and communicate in the positive. These are some key messages. They're on the Oregon for All website that whenever you're talking to friends, family, coworkers who might not understand the importance of immigrant and refugees here in Oregon, we want to ground not in the negative, speaking against the president or his hateful agenda, although that is something that is very important, but talking the positive about our immigrant and refugee friends and neighbors. Immigrant Oregonians are families, friends, neighbors, classmates, and colleagues. They're part of what makes Oregon such a beautiful place to live in. In Oregon, we believe in caring for each other and protecting our communities against people who try to divide us. Hardworking immigrants are part of our families, communities, workplaces, and places of worship and should be safe from harassment just like any other Oregonian. And Oregonians reject harmful efforts to divide our communities and families. Finally, our state is enriched by the diversity of experiences, cultures, and traditions that all of us, including immigrants, bring to our communities. We know there's a diversity of political opinion in our state. Some of you may serve patients in areas where you're concerned there's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, and there might be. I don't want to sugarcoat that. But critically, we know that the bulk of Oregonians believe that immigration law, regardless of where they fall in the political spectrum, should be fair, humane, and any changes to immigration law should be orderly. We know that what the president's doing is unfair, it's inhumane, and it's chaotic. And fundamentally, Oregonians reject that. Again, our Oregon values are as a sanctuary state that's been defended at the ballot, it's been defended in the legislature, and it's been shown that those are the values Oregon has as a welcoming state. I am going to stop screen sharing this slide deck so I can go over a couple other critical resources for you. The Oregon Department of Justice has its Sanctuary Promise guidance. It has guidance for schools, for law enforcement and correctional settings, and guidance for hospital and healthcare settings. So this is the law in Oregon as enforced by our Attorney General. So you have the opportunity to read a little bit more about this here if you're interested. And most critically, there's the Sanctuary Promise Violations Hotline. Should you believe that any state or local government in Oregon is using its resources to engage in immigration enforcement without a court order. You can report that either electronically or via a call to the Sanctuary Promise Violations Hotline, and that's something that can be investigated by the Attorney General. They have a toolkit, a community toolkit that our state attorney general has created. This has a lot of social media resources. If there's a communications lead at your hospital that wants to communicate to the community about how we're a sanctuary state and we're a state where folks should feel safe gaining access to healthcare, there are resources on there that your communications team could use in a variety of languages to communicate out to your community and your patients. Next, the National ACLU has a hub specifically for healthcare providers, and it has a whole bunch of scenarios that you might want to consider. So let's say, for example, you have a question, do I have to allow law enforcement entrance into my medical workplace? You can see here from the ACLU's national hub, law enforcement can enter any part of the premises that's open to the public. In a doctor's office or clinic, this would typically be the waiting room, unless law enforcement has a search warrant, a judicial warrant, for ICE, or an exception to the warrant requirement applies. For example, if you or a member of your staff give consent, they cannot lawfully enter any place that is not public. If law enforcement asks for your consent to enter other areas of your workplace, you have the right to say no. Though law enforcement might enter anyway, even if you refuse to provide consent, objecting before or during any entry or search can help to preserve your right in later legal proceedings. So again, it's really a matter of extensive training and preparation with your team, because if someone does give consent for them to enter a private area, they can now enter. So it's critically important that you train your team to delegate one or a few key people who are trained and prepared to speak to law enforcement and ICE and say, no, you do not have permission to enter these private areas. Do you have a judicial warrant? Lastly, we'll be including in a follow-up link this document about what providers need to know from Physicians for Human Rights and the National Immigration Law Center. This has some critical information for you all, including about that basis of legal protections for patients that a lot of this information was based on, that you all can peruse. Again, I want to emphasize there's a lot of different scenarios that can come up, and this presentation should not be mistaken for legal advice. Ultimately, you're going to have to work with the legal counsel in your facilities and talk to them about specific scenarios, and an opportunity to build relationships with your fellow union members, your fellow nurses, with the other folks that work in your facility, and to engage with your employer or whomever is in charge in your facility to discuss how to prepare for these wide variety of scenarios. With that, I don't know if folks have questions. I will be happy to talk about any questions or concerns that you all have.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ethan. There are some questions. I'm going to read them off here, but folks should feel free to put more questions in the chat. We'll end right at 9 here. So if questions don't get answered, we'll get you answers to all those. And again, we will include these resources. ONA has a webpage called oregonrn.org/federal threats. And there's links to all of our different the pieces of work that we're doing to push back against all these threats coming, including a whole page link there about immigration, where this content will get added to in the coming days. Okay, lots of questions. Okay, does the quote order signed by a judge piece of the sanctuary law have to specifically list persons being searched for by name, or is it just a blanket order to go after immigrants in Oregon? Like,
If I understand that question correctly, we're talking about what a judicial warrant would be, as
yeah.
distinct from an ICE warrant. So I'll screen share again and go back to that slide from my presentation. So just one moment while I pull that up.
Does the warrant need to list the name of the person they are searching for.
So a judicial warrant is valid if it includes the name of a court case number and sections that describes the specific areas to be searched. So it need not list a specific individual, no. The judicial warrant. It will describe an area to be searched. That is distinct from an ICE warrant, which is not a judicial warrant. An ICE warrant does not give them the right to go into the private areas of your facility. That ICE warrant might list a person that they're there to arrest. But the ICE warrant does not give them permission to go into the private areas of your facility. This judicial warrant will list areas to be searched, which is, again, another example of why it can be helpful to observe what they're doing. So if the judicial warrant mentioned a specific area of your facility that they could search, and they went outside of that area, then documenting that and making sure you take note of that can be helpful later on.
Cool. And a question is related to this. Will the warrant specifically say, quote, judicial warrant clearly on the form? Or where will they be able to see that? Maybe we could share that again.
Yeah.
Would that be an obvious thing?
So let me. So what you're going to want to look for is the name of the court here. So United States District Court, mentioning it. It'll have a case number, a signature of a judge, and a description of what it is they're going to search. So this is what a judicial warrant would look like. It's going to have the court, case number, name, and signature of a judge. They can't have the signature of a judge if it's from a federal agency and not a judge. So the judge is a critical thing. The ICE warrant doesn't mention a court. It doesn't have a case number. And critically, it's not signed by a judge. It doesn't have the name of a judge on it.
So the warrants do not say judicial warrant or ICE warrant on there. It's these other things that you need to look for.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And again, talk to the folks on your facility. It may be that your hospital may decide to delegate to a certain person interacting with ICE, delegate to, if there is a legal counsel who's consistently present, so that maybe none of you all need to be in this position to make this review. But yes, these are some of those basic facts.
Another question. My workplace is the patient's home. In talking about workplaces, any specifics unique to those of us working in home health?
What I'd emphasize is what we talked about. I'll screen share again and go to our earlier slides. Here we go. Based on Fourth Amendment rights, an agent can't enter a home unless they've got a warrant to enter, signed by a judge or magistrate with the name of the resident on it, and they slide it under the door. So if ICE were to knock on a door of a private residence, just like they can't enter the private areas of a workplace, they cannot enter a private home without a judicial warrant. They'd have to have that warrant and slide that under a door before they could enter a private residence. When they're knocking on that door as an immigration agent, you do not have to open the door for them unless they have that judicial warrant. That's true for a private residence, as a constitutional right for all residents, even if the person who's the renter or homeowner is undocumented. These are rights for all residents.
Got it. Thank you. Let's take a few more. Does a hospital room count as a private area? We allow visitors to come and go. So would that fall under the quote invitation only section?
As I mentioned at the beginning, there's inevitably going to be scenarios where there might just be too much ambiguity for me to give a simple pat answer. My guess would be that you all don't let any member of the public walk into any hospital room, that it has to be someone who in some way has a connection to the patient. So it's not truly open to the public the way the waiting room or certain facility parts of your facility are, where truly anyone can walk in off the street. But ultimately, that's something you're going to want to talk to your legal counsel, going to want to talk as a facility about. But I think there's a difference between true public areas where anyone in the public can walk in, or a place that like a patient can have their family member in, but it's not open to anyone from the public. But again, I can't give a definitive answer on that. That unfortunately I wish I could, but that's going to have to be a facility by facility conversation.
Thank you. Again, more questions, or if some of the questions that were asked and you need follow up to, please put them in the Q&A. How can I protect my patients at a school-based health center as they enter and leave our clinic? And I would just add to that, how can folks protect patients as they enter or leave if they're sort of coming
Mhm.
into the school-based health center or hospital or clinic or leaving?
Yeah. Um, the most important thing you can do is make sure that folks know their rights. And the follow-up resources that we'll send to your great team will include things like the red cards. You can have those on a front desk so folks can have the opportunity to know their rights. That ICE could walk up to anyone outside of a school, outside of a hospital, outside of a workplace, walking down the street. That's something that they can do here in Oregon. Us being a sanctuary state doesn't prevent that. Um, it's likely a frustrating answer. You all care so deeply that you want to be able to do more. But we focus on what we can do, which is making sure people know their rights. So if ICE does come up to them outside your facility, they know they don't have to answer their questions. They can ask for a lawyer. They can say, "Am I free to go?" And if ICE says that they are, that they can then leave calmly. Um, I wish there was something more profound that's possible, but ultimately, what we can do is make sure folks know their rights.
Great, thank you. Do ICE agents wear plain clothes or uniforms? Is it easy to identify an ICE agent?
It might not be, no. That we've seen a wide variety of situations for how ICE presents. That it might not be easy to identify them at all.
And they don't have to identify with any badge or anything like that.
Um, I want to be really careful not to give any misinformation.
Sure.
Um, if they present themselves as law enforcement, um, you can say, "Oh, who are you with? You know, what law enforcement?" And then if they say they're ICE, then again, they need that judicial warrant to get in any private facility. That there are many situations, this isn't limited to ICE or the immigration context. There are many situations where law enforcement can use some tricky and duplicitous tactics. Something at the ACLU we have a lot of concern about that's hardly limited to immigration. So I wouldn't depend on folks always being very clear and presenting themselves very clear.
Okay. If another RN grants permission to enter a private space, can someone else revoke it?
That's a tricky situation. They've been granted uh, the right to come on in. And as mentioned in my presentation, even if you say that they can't come on in, they might come on into a private area anyway. Um, So even if the person said, no, you can't come in, they might come in anyway. So even if if one person's granted them permission and another person said, well, no, you don't have permission, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to leave. Again, I think that's where training and preparation comes in, making sure that everyone knows whom is delegated to speak to ICE, so that only those folks who have that delegated authority are speaking to them so that no one erroneously speaks out of turn and grants them permission to a private area.
Do these same rules and protections apply to a visitor who is visiting one of our patients at one of our facilities?
I want to make sure I understand that. So,
So
yeah, they,
is it anyone in the facility, not just patients, that these same kind of rules apply to. So if a visitor comes and visits a patient in the hospital, the same rules apply as they would if ICE is targeting this visitor versus ICE targeting a patient.
Yeah, if ICE is trying to get into a private area where a visitor's with a patient, that remains a private area. Um, and they don't have the right to go into that private area without a judicial warrant. And anyone has the right to not speak to ICE, to ask for an attorney, visitor, patient, anyone. So yes, if a visitor is in a private area where they're allowed to be because of their relationship with a patient, but it's not a public area, it's not open to any member of the public, then ICE cannot go into that private area to search for anything or anyone without that judicial warrant.
Our hospital requires check-in with security before anyone can enter the hospital. Can security say no to ICE agents?
Anyone who's delegated that authority by your employer could do so.
So that could be part of the plan that happens if that's
Exactly. Yeah.
who they have to check in with. Okay. So we have a lot of questions about the ICE warrant versus the judicial warrants.
Yeah.
What does the ICE warrant allow them to do?
Um, ultimately, I don't want to speak on what it can do. Um, because I don't want to give any false information. But I think for what's most important to remember is that it does not allow them to get into your private areas. And I know, apologies, I'm a bit of a broken record here. So, for all intents and purposes, for these conversations, it has no power over you. If ICE is in a public area of your hospital talking to people, they have a right to be there, just like any other member of the public. You can't stop them from being there. So, if they have an ICE warrant and they're speaking to someone in the public area of your hospital, makes no never mind if they had an ICE warrant or didn't have it. So it functionally has no relevance to their ability to come and go and speak to anyone there. In terms of the private areas of your facility, it has no power. It grants them no power to enter the private areas of your facility.
Okay, I got two more questions and then we'll wrap up here because we're approaching 9. So worst case scenario, ICE enters without permission and apprehends a patient still needing critical care. Is there anything nurses or providers can do to protect the patient at that point?
Let me take a look if that scenario is discussed in our national guidance. It isn't. Ultimately, and I know this is a frustrating answer, I think that's going to have to be a question for your local legal counsel. Apologies. I know that's a frustrating answer.
That's okay. Um, uh, the EMTALA protects them, perhaps. We can,
Could be.
yeah, we can get more accurate answers on that. And part of our follow-up, though, we can take a note on that and ask around about that. Okay, just one other note before we wrap up from Courtney as a reminder, recording in your facility, healthcare workers could get into trouble for that, for HIPAA violations. So that's something that folks, while, we want to do that in terms of this policy, we also need to be careful with that about HIPAA violations. So I think that's all the questions that we're going to be able to get to today. Really appreciate y'all for joining. This is an ongoing conversation for us. And so we're going to send out and post all the resources here from Ethan and the ACLU of Oregon. And we'll get those out to folks. And really just want to extend a huge thank you to ACLU and Ethan for being here tonight. Thank you to everybody that attended. Again, to make a donation to ACLU for all this work, aclu-or.org is their website. And for all of the sort of guidance and content that we've produced on our federal threats, um, uh, please go to oregonrn.org/federal threats. We'll include this presentation, we'll include the resources from the ACLU, and we have other resources from ANA and the AFL-CIO as well. So with that, I'm going to sign us all off. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much.